Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he spent some time there with them and baptized. John also was baptizing at Aenon near Salim, because the water was abundant there, and people kept coming and were being baptized. John, of course, had not yet been thrown into prison. Now, a discussion about purification arose between John's disciples and a Judean. They came to John and asked him, "Rabbi, the one who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you testified, here he is baptizing, and everybody is going to him." John answered, "No one can receive anything except what has been given from heaven. You yourselves are witnesses that I said, I am not the Messiah, but that I have been sent ahead of him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. For this reason, my joy has been fulfilled. He must increase, but I must decrease." The Gospel inspired by God.
Praise to you, Lord.
So for the first 6 years of my life, I lived with my grandparents at number 34 St. Rita's Avenue in a little suburb of Cork called, and I'll give you $10 if you can pronounce it, Gronabrahar.
What?
Gronabrahar. 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 In Gaelic, Gronabrahar means the pathway of the monks. But it was a housing estate that was created in the early 1930s to try to relieve the congestion inside in the city centre, where they were taking people out of overcrowded tenements and putting them into new housing estates out in the suburbs. And St. Rita's Avenue consisted of about 40 houses in 2 rows facing each other, and there was a concrete strip in between. But the highlight of the year, every single year that I lived there, very definitely, was June 24th. What we called in Ireland Bonfire Night. I don't know if you had Bonfire Night here or not. It's the feast of St. John the Baptist, but it's called Bonfire Night. And for weeks beforehand, people would go around to the housing estate and they would collect money, pennies from people. And then they'd buy a whole bunch of goodies, cookies and sweets for the kids, whatever. And then they'd build this huge big bonfire. They'd be collecting rubbish for weeks beforehand, and there'd be an old tire thrown in on top of it, and old furniture thrown into it. I mean, the thing would be like 10, 12 feet high. It would take up the entire width of the street. And then beginning at 10 o'clock on the 24th, going on till about 6 a.m. the next morning, the fire would be lit, and then people would bring their chairs out around it, and they'd be telling stories and singing songs and playing music, and the kids would have a blast. And then towards the end of the night, when the fire was dying down, the young heroes would try to jump across the fire. And there was plenty of accidents, let me tell you. But it was a big feat to take a run and see if you could jump over the flames and land at the other side without getting scorched to death. So it was an old pagan feast, an old Celtic feast. The summer solstice, that's basically what it was. And so it's very interesting to me how the church has plagiarized this great statement of John. At the end of today's gospel, we are told when John's disciples began complaining that Jesus was getting more disciples than he had now, John says, he must increase and I must decrease. And the church did a very, very clever thing with it. It artificially gave Jesus birth at the winter solstice. We have no idea when Jesus was born. So they just plagiarized a date, the winter solstice. And therefore they gave John's birth as the summer solstice. And at the summer solstice, immediately afterwards, the sun begins to decrease. And at the winter solstice, immediately afterwards, the sun begins to increase. And so you have the statement of John saying, he must increase, because he was born on the winter solstice, and the sun is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The light, more and more light is coming to the world. I must decrease. I'm born on the summer solstice, and the days are going to get shorter and shorter and shorter immediately after I'm born. So very cleverly positioning the two birth dates. Now, this notion of plagiarism is a very, very old. One of the fastest ways to achieve success is to plagiarize somebody else's efforts. Now, you can do this in science, or you can do it in literature, or you can do it in religion. And religion does it in 2 main ways. It plagiarizes holy places and it plagiarizes holy dates. And so again and again throughout the world, you find that, for instance, in Europe, all the great cathedrals of Europe that were built in the 13th century were all plagiarized. They were old, sacred pagan sites, Celtic sites very, very often, that there had been thousands of years of devotion. It's like it had been impregnated with the veneration of hundreds of generations of pagans or other religions, and now they take over these sacred sites and they build their sacred cathedrals on it. The very same thing with other religions. The Dome of the Rock, the second most holy shrine in Islam, is built on the site of the old Temple of Jerusalem that got destroyed. The second temple got destroyed in the year 70 AD by the Romans and was never rebuilt. But the Muslims came and they built their second most important shrine after Mecca at the Dome of the Rock right there. So again and again and again you find that new religions kind of plagiarize old sacred places and take them over. And you get the very same thing with sacred times. And so, for instance, December 21st, the winter solstice, was an old pagan feast, and it was also the feast of the birthday of Mithra. And Mithra was the single strongest competitor during the time that Christianity was coming to the forefront. In the Roman Empire at that stage, when Christianity was finally legalized, the greatest competitor was Mithraism. And Mithra had been born on that date, so the Christians take over that and they plagiarize that date from Mithraism. You find the very same thing they do with the Celtic calendar. Well, the 4 great feasts in the Celtic calendar are Imbolc, which is the 1st of February, and Bealtaine, which is the 1st of May, and Lunasa, which is the 1st of August, and Samhain, which is the 1st of November. And again, the Christian churches take over these dates. So the 1st of February now gets assigned to Saint Bridget, who's a converted, pagan, Irish pagan. She gets converted being a saint of the Christian churches. And the 1st of May, Bealtaine, is dedicated to Mary. Now, when communism will come along, they'll dedicate that as the Feast of the Worker. And so every group is trying to make it kind of special. And the 1st of August is dedicated to the harvest festivals. And the 1st of on Samhain, the 1st of November, is the Feast of All Saints. And so we'll plagiarize these sacred dates again and again and again. So plagiarism is alive and well and living on planet Earth. But I want to end by just looking at what is the relationship between John the Baptist and Jesus? And it depends where you look. All the Gospels have totally different ideas. So today we read from the Gospel of John. And John's Gospel makes the claim that at the beginning of his ministry, John was baptizing, and Jesus came along and got baptized. And John has a whole bunch of disciples, and 2 of his disciples are a guy called John as well, and Andrew. And John is the brother of James, and Andrew is the brother of Peter, and they're disciples of John the Baptist. And John is talking about the coming Messiah, and they're asking, when will the Messiah come? And Jesus passes by, and John says, there he is. There's the Lamb of God. And the 2 guys follow him very sheepishly, and Jesus looks around and says, what's up, dudes? And they're kind of stuck for an answer. They said, where do you hang out? Where's your pad? And he says, come and see. And so they spend the day with him, talking to him, and then they're convinced that he's the Messiah. So according to John's Gospel, John the Baptist points out Jesus and says, there is the Lamb of God. And today you have a follow-on story where John continues to baptize, but now Jesus has begun baptizing. Although in actual fact, we're told later in the Gospel that Jesus never actually baptized anybody himself. His disciples baptized, but he himself did not baptize. But now the remaining disciples of John are upset that Jesus seems to be gaining more followers than John himself is. And then John makes the statement, I told you, I am not the Messiah. I've come to prepare for the Messiah. He is the Lamb of God. He must increase and I must decrease. So in the Gospel of John, you get the impression that John the Baptist and Jesus, one is the precursor to the other. One is preparing the way for the Messiah, and the other is the Messiah. When you look at Luke's Gospel, you get a very different picture. In Luke's Gospel, they're cousins, and they actually met in utero. When Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant, and Mary has a visit from the angel, and she goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, we are told, Elizabeth, when she heard the voice of Mary, the baby in her womb leapt for joy. So like John the Baptist and Jesus are meeting while they're still both in utero. And so presumably, according to Luke's gospel, presumably the two kids would have met many, many, many times. Because every year, all Jewish males had to go to Jerusalem for two big feasts. So presumably Joseph would have gone down and he would have taken Mary and the child. And so John the Baptist would have been living nearby because his dad was a priest. And so presumably the kids would have played with each other for years. So in Luke's gospel, you get the impression that they're cousins who know each other very well. You get in Matthew's gospel, and John the Baptist has no idea who Jesus is, never heard about him. So when John is put into prison, he sends a messenger out. He's been hearing reports about this new guy who's a miracle worker, and he sends delegates out to John the Baptist, to Jesus, to say, "Are you he who is to come, or should we be waiting for somebody else?" In other words, are you the Messiah we've been waiting for, or should we wait for somebody else? So you get the impression in Matthew's gospel that John the Baptist has never heard about Jesus until he got into prison. And he's now figuring, is this the guy that I've been kind of preparing for, whom I never met, or are we waiting for somebody else here? Elsewhere, you get the impression that Jesus was the heir apparent to John. It's like the kind of the relationship between Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. That Jung was the heir apparent, the designated heir apparent of Freud, except they had a big falling out. So he actually never inherited from Freud. He had to start his own movement. But you get the impression that in some senses that Jesus is a disciple of John, but that when John gets thrown into prison, then Jesus takes over the ministry of John. So in another place you get the impression that they were fellow Essenes, that they're both, ascetics who had lived in the desert. So it's very hard to establish what the actual relationship between Jesus and John the Baptist actually was. Joe?
Is there any explanation why the church or other people feel that Jesus did not baptize, like John did?
Okay. So it's interesting. I addressed that in a homily on the Sunday. It was Sunday last, or the Sunday before that, because so my own total hit in it is that baptism as practiced by the churches or by other religions is just a kind of a ritualizing of something that has already happened, that every baby is baptized in the waters of the womb. So it's the mother who baptizes the child. So the sacrament of baptism is conferred in utero. It is the realization that by, when a soul merges with a fetus or a developing embryo, incarnation is the sacrament of baptism. It is the sacrament of signing up for an incarnation. And so in some senses, it is the waters of the womb that baptize the child. And so the subsequent ceremony that's done in a church, is just an acknowledgement on the part of the community that indeed this new member has come along with a specific mission and a specific purpose. And I also made the statement that I feel that there are two sacraments that happen in utero. One, as the child is docking, as the embryo and the soul are docking with each other, that the amniotic fluid is baptizing that sacred mission that the soul is on. And the second one is when the child is being born, that literally the vaginal juices are the chrism of ordination. So the vaginal juices, they confer immunity on the little newborn against a whole bunch of allergens. So it's very, very important, that there's the difference between a cesarean section and a natural birth. That literally the vaginal juices literally protect the child's immune system from a whole bunch of allergens. But much more importantly than that, I believe, is that they are the chrism of ordination. And that every child in the act of being born, is ipso facto a priest. And the essence of priesthood is not about just, presiding over the sacramental life of the church. It's not about preaching homilies. It's not about, blessing marriages. It's not about conducting liturgical services. The essence of priesthood is the ability to take the ordinary and to see within it the miraculous, to encounter the mundane and to recognize the mystical at its core, to see the secular and to be able to see through to the essence of the sacred hidden within. That's the essence of priesthood. It's to turn the ordinary life into an extraordinary adventure because you understand that you're on a mission. And so for that reason, that's my interpretation of why Jesus wasn't actually pouring water on people's heads. He recognized they were already baptized and they were already priests. It was only a question of coming aware and coming awake to that realization. You still look puzzled, Joe.
Yeah, because Jesus clearly wanted to be baptized by John.
Yeah.
And if he truly believed that it's already happened, then why did he publicly want people to see him being baptized? And that was really important to the beginning of his ministry, I think, so that he was officially, publicly seen as a priest. And then when he becomes the priest, he does not do the sacrament of what we call the sacrament of baptism.
So I'd say two things to it. The first one is that John the Baptist himself makes the same objection. John is baptizing, there's hundreds and hundreds of people coming to John to be baptized, including soldiers and Pharisees and ever. When Jesus comes, John says to him, why are you coming to me to be baptized? It is you who should be baptizing me. And Jesus says, let it be. Let's follow the format until now. So in some senses, that's the beginning of, in some senses, the recognition by the community of the active ministry of Jesus. So once that has begun, you've ushered in a whole new understanding of the kingdom of heaven. So in some senses, he's bringing to completion an old understanding. And that's why he will also say of John, at one stage, once John in prison had sent messengers to inquire if Jesus was the one they were waiting for or not, once the messengers had left, Jesus said to the crowd, what did you go out to the desert to see when you were looking for John the Baptist? Was it somebody dressed in fine linen? You find those people in palaces of kings. Was it somebody who feasted sumptuously every day? No, that's not what you went to see. You went out to see, I'll tell you, there has never been born of woman a greater than John the Baptist. Of all the men born of women, there has never been a greater than John the Baptist. And then immediately he goes on, he says, but the least in the kingdom is greater than John. So again, here's a paradox. So what's the meaning of it? John is the end of the old dispensation. It's the dispensation where people are sanctified through ascetic practice and legal, enactment by keeping to the law, the 613 precepts of law. You keep to them fastidiously and you live a very ascetic lifestyle. That's how you get enlightened in the old dispensation. And Christ says, if that's what enlightenment is about, nobody ever did it better than John the Baptist. But the least in the kingdom is greater than John. Because the new dispensation is about love and compassion. It's not about law. It's not about asceticism. It's about recognizing the holy, the sacred in the secular. And so, in some senses, Jesus' own baptism is bringing to a close the old dispensation, and he's opening up a whole new understanding of enlightenment. Yeah. Carol.
So I like this idea of the sacred places and sacred times, because space and time are what seems to be that thing that separates us the most.
Right.
So there must have been from early times an understanding that was the thin connection back to who we are.
Right.
And so everyone, I suppose some people, I don't think, I don't want to say people did it in a superstitious way because it has such a negative connotation, but there must have been some feeling that there is this accumulation of spirit in certain places. And, it's curious how they might have found them to begin with. Who were the people who charted those spaces.
Interesting.
And then they could, sort of honor it with stones or whatever.
Totally. So we know, for instance, from Einstein's, theory of relativity, E equal mc squared, that ultimately everything reduces down in the physical world, in the physical cosmos, everything reduces down to energy. And energy, every living thing then has its own particular vibration or its own kind of frequency of energy. So there's a frequency to every single organ in the body, literally has its own frequency. And so we know, for instance, that the human heart generates 100 times greater magnetic and electrical field than the human brain does. So different organs in the body generate different fields of frequencies and vibrations and energies. And so the human body itself has an energy system. Everything we touch has energy, and the energy is not, it's not contained by the organism. It radiates out and it intermingles with people. And so I don't know if you've had the experience sometimes of going into a room and immediately feeling, oh wow, something just weird just happened in this room before I came in. So I know, for instance, as a psychologist, that sometimes after a particularly difficult session with a client, particularly if it's a family system and there's a lot of, argument going on, that I will clear the space in my office. I have a ritual for clearing space before I allow the next person to come in. I don't want them walking into, weird energy that they just, had been generated in the room. So we pick up energies from people and we impregnate places with our own energies. So when you bring a whole bunch of people over a long period of human history into a specific location and you pray there, you're literally impregnating that space with the energy of prayer. Now, how do they identify those places to begin with? There are obviously, there are natural power spots on planet Earth. And various cultures have recognized those. Like, for instance, Sedona, it would appear, is such a space for Native American Indians. Obviously, Mecca is such a place for Islam, Jerusalem for Christians, Rome perhaps for Catholics. In Ireland, there were designated places where great hermits had lived their lives, and then they became shrines eventually. So we impregnate places with our energy, and particularly if there's a whole bunch of people over an extended period of time are bringing sacred energy to our physical space. Very, very often the space has previously been identified as being sacred in its own right, and then you add this accumulation of human sacredness to it as well, and then eventually it's obvious to everybody that there's a very, very different energy. I mean, why do people go into the old churches? There's, some of them they're not great architectural, edifices, but there's something about it, a space in which human people have just prayed again and again and again and again over 100 years. And you go in there and you feel like you've crawled into the womb of Mother Earth. Yeah.
And that's when the whole notion of denominations and particular religions just disappears.
Dissolves. Yeah. Mary.
So I just had that very experience what you described. I was recently in New Mexico in late October and went to a very small church, a couple hundred years old, Santeria de Chimayo, and it's they consider it it's many people come to create pilgrimages to this church. They believe that there's a holy dirt that sits underneath the church, and in fact they've created just a small little room, an alcove room, and a tiny little hole, and it's this very sand-like dirt. And people come, and I guess during Holy Week, there are pilgrimages from, they walk from, say, Santa Fe, which to this church is about 26 miles, even as far as Albuquerque, which could be up to 50 miles, but apparently from all over the state. And they come, and you come to this church and you see lots of canes and wheelchairs, and you see how everybody's come to pray for the healing of their loved ones themselves. And in fact, I went and I was able to take a little bit of the dirt, and when I went into the little room, I just placed my hands in there and I prayed for my own healing and for those that I love. And then I took some out, and I was allowed to take a little bit out, and I just gave some to Patricia Weaver over Christmas. So I gave her some information about that, and also to my son. But it was very much what you described. Just this tiny little, really chapel, and but it's so powerful. Just even driving up to it, you could feel the energy, and so I really can appreciate over the years, the energy collection, if you will, that space has created. That's one point. The other point I wanted to make is, as I always want to come here and be away, how can I apply your message? What is that going to look like for me in my life? And it's interesting because in my coaching, I'm often charging and challenging my students and my clients to be a person of increase. And I use that word, to be a person of increase. Because if we're all children of God, we all have our own, our own unique set of skills and capabilities and talents and knowledge, and to use all of that to be a person of increase for others. And that's how we serve, and this is how we shine our light, God's light. And so as I was just listening to your homily, I'm thinking we're all children of God, just as Jesus, and it is our time, it is us to be that person in Christ.
It's beautiful, Mary. It's beautiful. So the image that's coming to me as I listen to you is like, in some senses, each human being, I believe it's true of all other creatures as well, but just focus on the human family for a moment. Each human being is like a neuron on a Christ-conscious brain, in some senses. And the beauty of neurons is not that they act as individual kind of nerve, individual kind of brain cells, but that they can establish a multitude of connections to other neurons. So there's this circuitry that can be created. So it's almost as if every neuron can establish a wormhole connection to any other neuron. And wormholes are ways in which you can project photons of light, in which you can embed information or energy, and transmit it. And it's not subject to the laws of, it takes a long time to travel long distances. It's instantaneous. That a wormhole is a way of instantaneously, transmitting energy and information over humongous distances. And so in some senses that all human beings have this interconnection. That every time you think of somebody, you've literally established a wormhole connection, and you're sending photons of light embedded with information. Now it can be anger that you're submitting, if you're thinking evil thoughts about somebody, or angry thoughts about somebody. It can be love, healing, but you're establishing literally a wormhole with everybody whom you think of, and you're sending photons of light embedded with whatever you're feeling towards that person is traveling through the system. Now I think the same thing is true about the cosmos itself, that all the bodies in the cosmos, like our little planet, are connected to all other heavenly bodies. And so I think that these power spots on planet Earth are often the kind of the end point of wormholes that are connecting, our planet to other heavenly bodies, and that therefore there's information and there's energy, being pushed through those wormholes, and that's why you find those are sacred spaces, not just in their own right, not just because they've congregated people and pray around them, but they're in contact with other heavenly bodies, and stuff is being transmitted through photons of light, embedded with information and love of various kinds.
So you do get the sense that there are places of travel, that there's a space to go into.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very definitely.
Which is exactly what you're saying.
It's like the dendrites and the axons on a nerve, on a brain cell. Yeah. The recipient and the sender. Yeah. It's time to pray, guys. God our Father and our Mother, we thank you again this morning for the miracle of a brand new day, in which we can attempt to be channels of love, of light and of logos, of life and of laughter, of wisdom and information for our planet and for our times. For this we pray to the Lord.